It was the summer of 1944. Deep in the heart of Texas, the air shimmered with heat, so heavy it seemed to bend the horizon itself. A train screeched to a halt along a desolate siding, its steel body glowing under the white sun. Dust rolled off the tracks like smoke. Then came silence, broken only by the clatter of boots and the distant hum of cicadas. From the last carriage came the metallic rattle of chains. One by one, German prisoners stepped down into the light, blinking against the glare. They were women nurses, clerks, auxiliaries' faces, pale and drawn from weeks at sea. The Atlantic salt still clung to their hair. The fear still lived behind their eyes. Among them was Anna Krüger, 25, a nurse from Hamburg, who had spent more nights than she could count, binding wounds in basements lit by candle smoke. The Texas sun hit her like a punishment. She squinted toward the guards lined up along the platform. Their khaki uniforms looked almost golden in the light. Rifles glinted, a flag fluttered lazily behind them, and in the middle of all that order stood a young soldier who did not seem to belong. He was tall, sun-browned, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. He wasn't shouting orders or even looking at the prisoners. Instead, he held a small paper bag and ate something hand to mouth, slow, absent-minded. The sound was soft but strange, like tiny bursts of gunfire. Pop, pop. Each crack made Anna flinch before she realized it wasn't a weapon. The smell drifted through the heat, rich, salty, faintly sweet. It didn't fit this place of dust and discipline. Butter, corn. The scent carried over the line of shackled women until it reached her, confusing and maddening. For a second she forgot the chains around her wrists, forgot the orders barked in English she couldn't understand. The young guard looked up briefly. Their eyes met, and he gave a small, almost shy nod. She turned away quickly, ashamed that the simple act of eating could unsettle her more than captivity itself. As the officer shouted the next command, the smell lingered, heavy and human. She didn't know it yet, but that smell, butter and corn, would haunt her more than the war itself. The march began as soon as the last woman stepped off the train. Boots scuffed the dry earth, dust rising around their legs like smoke from a dying fire. The prisoners moved in a narrow line, hands still bound, heads lowered beneath the Texas sun that burned without mercy. Each step pressed heat deeper into their bones. Behind them, the train exhaled a long hiss as if relieved to be rid of them. Anna's legs trembled with every stride. The metal cuffs rubbed her wrists raw, leaving thin red circles that pulsed with each heartbeat. Around her, women stumbled, muttering soft prayers in German. One collapsed briefly, only to be yanked upright by a guard's steady hand, not cruel, just firm. The contrast startled her. In Germany, a fall like that would have earned a rifle, but here, the soldier merely said, "Easy now, ma'am," and guided the woman back into line. The road stretched toward a cluster of wooden barracks fenced by silver wire. The air shimmered above the roofs, and somewhere in the distance came a sound that didn't belong. American guards by the gate leaned against posts, trading jokes she couldn't understand. One tossed a handful of yellow kernels into a pot over a small fire. Seconds later, sharp cracks rang out again, pop-a-pop like tiny fireworks. The buttery scent from the station returned, carried on the wind. It mingled with the dust and sweat, confusing her senses. How could such a sweet smell exist in a place built for captivity? It felt wrong, indecent even, that her hunger noticed it. She caught herself inhaling deeply before shame pulled her gaze back to the dirt. As they entered the camp, she noticed more contradictions. Barbed wire but blooming flowers, rifles but easy smiles. Orders barked in English, followed by polite gestures. The guards moved with discipline but without the edge of hatred she expected. The rhythm of their world felt efficient, almost gentle. By the time the gate closed behind them, Anna's mind was spinning, exhaustion mixed with disbelief, until she couldn't tell which was heavier, the heat on her skin or the questions in her chest. The women had crossed an ocean to find their enemies. Instead, they had walked into confusion. The camp's first evening settled under a red sky, the air still thick with dust and exhaustion. The prisoners were ordered to stand in formation beside the barracks, waiting for inspection. No one spoke. The chains had been removed, but the silence felt heavier than iron. Anna's throat burned from the long march. The tin canteen she had been promised during transport never came. The taste of salt and grit clung to her lips. She dared not ask for water. In her mind, requests led to punishment. A few meters away, the young guard from the Trainuli Turner stood at ease, a rifle slung over his shoulder, the same paper bag of popcorn folded neatly into his pocket. He watched the women without the sharp, detached eyes of command. His gaze held something softer, almost uncertain. When the officer barked for the guards to maintain distance, Eli hesitated. The women looked near collapse, faces sunburned, uniforms stiff with sweat. His hand moved to his belt where his canteen hung. For a moment, he just held it, the metal catching the last glint of sunset. Then, as quietly as if afraid of his own decision, he stepped forward. Anna noticed first. A shadow fell across her feet, and a canteen appeared before her eyes. The water inside sloshed faintly, cool and merciful. She froze, unsure if it was a trick. Eli nodded once, no words, no smile, just a simple gesture of offering. "Stand down, Corporal." The officer's voice cut through the heat. Every guard stiffened. Eli stopped mid-motion, but didn't withdraw his hand. The silence between them felt like the edge of a blade. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Dust swirled around their boots. Then the officer turned sharply, muttered something under his breath, and strode away toward the command tent. Eli exhaled slowly and placed the canteen on the ground in front of her, as if leaving an offering at an altar. Anna stared at it, the metal glinting under dying light. She didn't dare drink, but the gesture itself broke something invisible. That night, long after light, she could still feel the weight of that small mercy, cooler than water, heavier than guilt. That night, as the camp fell silent beneath a pale Texas moon, Anna lay awake on her narrow cot, staring at the wooden ceiling, the creak of distant boots, the hum of cricket sounds to calm for captivity. Her body rested, but her mind drifted backward, across an ocean, to the classrooms and parade grounds of Germany, where this war had first taken her. She could still hear the voices of the instructors, harsh, triumphant, absolute. If captured, they warned, expect no mercy from the Americans. They are merchants, not men. They worship money, not honor. They will use you, humiliate you, then destroy you. The words had burned themselves into her like scripture. Even in hospital tents, when she dressed wounds by candlelight, those warnings whispered beneath the bandages. Back then, she had believed it. She had imagined America as a land of steel and cruelty factories for weapons, not for kindness. To fall into their hands was to vanish into something mechanical and heartless. Now, lying in a barrack lined with clean bunks and stacked blankets, she couldn't reconcile the image. Earlier that evening, a guard had paused by the fence to hand out soap. Another had wished them good night, ladies in a soft southern accent. None of it matched the lectures drilled into her skull. Her thoughts tangled between exhaustion and disbelief. Were these gestures strategy, a trick to win obedience, or were they genuine and unthinkable? Simple decency from the enemy she had been taught to hate. She rolled onto her side. Across the room, a lantern glowed softly where a nurse scribbled in her diary. The air smelled faintly of starch, not blood. Outside, the guards were talking quietly by a fire. One of them laughed a deep, easy laugh that carried through the open window. It didn't sound like the voice of a monster. Anna closed her eyes, remembering the propaganda posters back home. Grotesque caricatures of Americans with fangs and cigarettes, grinning over maps of Europe. None of that existed here. Only tired young men, and the smell of corn and soap. The realization unsettled her more than fear ever had. Because if the enemy wasn't a monster, then what had she become, believing that he was? Morning in the camp came with the clang of a bell, not a shout. The prisoners rose to sunlight streaming through wooden slats, the air already warm but gentler than the ship's darkness they'd left behind. Anna folded her blanket with trembling precision, unsure if this was duty or habit. Outside, a line had already formed by the wash basin's metal tubs filled with clean water that shimmered like glass. Each woman received a towel, a bar of soap, and a brush. Anna stared at them as though they were artifacts from another world. Back home, soap was rationed to soldiers. Here, the enemy handed it to her freely. Breakfast followed a tray of oatmeal, bread, and steaming coffee. Real coffee. The scent alone nearly broke her. A guard motioned politely toward a bench, as if inviting her to dine, not detain. She hesitated before sitting, half expecting a trick, but none came. The food was plain, filling, absurdly normal. By mid-morning, the women were assigned work: sorting, laundry, tending gardens, mending uniforms. Each task came with rules posted neatly in English and German. Respect and discipline ensured dignity for all. The words felt foreign on the tongue, yet strangely believable when spoken here. At midday, they were given time to rest. Some lay in the shade of the barracks, others wrote in small notebooks provided by the Red Cross. The hum of cicadas filled the pauses where fear once lived. "Look at this," whispered Marta, one of the clerks, as she buttered her bread with shaking hands. "They feed us like guests." Anna gave a weak smile, still tasting disbelief more than food. "Guests behind wire," she said softly. Marta shrugged, eyes glancing toward the distant guard tower. "Still, I've known worse hosts." The line should have earned laughter, but none came. The truth of it sat too heavy. Around them, the guards went about their duties quietly, neither cruel nor kind, simply steady like farmers tending a field they didn't hate. That night, as the lights dimmed and the crickets took over again, Anna felt something unfamiliar stirring inside her chest. It wasn't comfort, not yet. It was confusion, the dangerous kind that asks whether everything you've believed could be wrong. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, the air still and bright, the kind of quiet that feels borrowed from peace itself. The women were hanging laundry on the lines stretched between barracks when a strange noise broke the calm up. Sudden cracks that made several of them flinch. Anna froze, her hands clutching a wet sheet. The sound came again, quick and rhythmic, pop, pop, pop like distant gunfire. For an instant her breath caught in panic. Guards nearby didn't react, which only deepened the confusion. One of them, the tall young man named Eli, knelt by a small iron pan over a camp stove, shaking it gently with practiced rhythm. The women crept closer, uncertain, watching from behind the fence. White puffs began to leap from the pan, tumbling like snow. The air filled with a smell so rich and warm it felt unreal. Melted butter, roasted corn, a sweetness that carried through the heat. Marta whispered, "What is that? Ammunition?" Anna frowned. "No, it smells good." Another woman muttered, half afraid, half curious, "Maybe it's feed for the chickens." They watched as Eli poured the contents into a tin bowl, the kernels still crackling softly. He grinned at another guard and tossed one into his mouth. The others followed, laughing. Their laughter wasn't cruel. It was carefree, absurdly human. The women stared, transfixed. The enemy ate this like candy. Anna's stomach tightened not from hunger, but from the dissonance. She had seen men starve in bombed cities, patients die over crusts of bread. And here, under a sky the color of brass, her captors roasted food for pleasure. Eli looked up and saw them watching. For a moment, the laughter faded. He hesitated, then held up a single kernel between two fingers, as if to show it wasn't dangerous. The women stepped back instinctively, unsure whether to trust the gesture or the smell. Anna turned away before anyone could see the tremor in her hands. The sound of popping still echoed in her ears long after it stopped. Kindness, she thought, might be America's most dangerous weapon. Section 1, The Machine of Order, approximately equals 400 words. By autumn of 1944, the machinery of captivity stretched from coast to coast. The United States held more than 400,000 Axis prisoners across 46 states, an empire of fences and discipline that ran not on fear but on order. From the pine woods of Alabama to the wheat plains of Kansas, every camp moved with the same quiet precision, a system built less like a prison and more like a factory where the product was compliance, not punishment. At dawn, bugles sounded in hundreds of places at once. Prisoners rose to the same schedule, ate the same rations, marched to work under the same watchful but measured eyes. Records were logged, food weighed, letters censored, all with the calm efficiency of a nation that believed rules could be moral armor. The Americans didn't need to shout. The rhythm of their system spoke for them. Anna saw it unfold each day in Camp Hearn. The gates opened and closed at the exact minute. Trucks arrived with military precision. Guards rotated in 4-hour shifts, as if the entire desert ran on clockwork. She could not help but compare it to the chaos she had left behind: bombed hospitals, shortages, the desperate scramble for survival. Here, even captivity had a schedule, and that made it strangely bearable. What unsettled her most was the lack of cruelty. The guards obeyed without anger, punished without rage, rewarded without affection. Their control was total but quiet, polished to a shine. When a woman broke a rule, the reprimand came like a line in a ledger, efficient, impersonal, final. No blows, no shouting, just procedure. In the evenings, as the sun turned the wire gold, Anna would listen to the steady hum of the camp, the soft clatter of utensils from the mess hall, the rhythmic crunch of boots on gravel, the faint laughter drifting from the guard posts. It was a symphony of order, and in that order lay something unnerving. The Americans had built decency into a system so vast it no longer needed compassion to function. It ran by itself, powered by rules and routine, in a world ruled by chaos. Even mercy could feel mechanical. The first time Anna overheard the guards talking about rations, she thought she had misunderstood. She was scrubbing metal trays outside the mess hall when 2 soldiers passed by, carrying ledgers and joking quietly. $2 a day per prisoner, one said, shaking his head. That's more than my pay. The other laughed. Washington spends millions feeding folks who tried to kill us. Makes no sense, but orders are orders. Their voices faded, but the numbers stayed. $2 a day. Anna did the arithmetic in her head. The habit of a nurse used to ration lists and field ledgers. $2 meant bread, beans, meat, coffee. Hundreds of prisoners meant hundreds of meals, every single day. The scale of it made her dizzy that evening. She studied her portion of dinner with new ice-baked beans, a slice of cornbread, a piece of fruit. The food was simple, plentiful, untouched by the hunger she had known back home. In Hamburg, her patients had died with hollow eyes. Here, the enemy was fed like farmhands after a long day's work. She asked Marta quietly, "Do you know how much this costs them?" Marta shrugged. "Too much for people they hate." That answer stayed with Anna all night. She lay awake, staring at the dark beams above her bunk, listening to the steady rhythm of the guards' footsteps outside. Each step sounded like a coin dropping into an endless machine money. Food, fuel, all spent to keep their captives alive. Was it kindness, strategy, or arrogance, so confident it could afford generosity? She remembered the ration cards her mother used to trade for turnips, the empty shelves, the nights spent boiling water just to feel warm. The arithmetic didn't fit in this place. Every number felt like a moral contradiction. Each calorie fed to a prisoner equaled another mouth starving in Germany. Each act of fairness eroded the image of the brutal America she had been told to hate. They could have starved them. Instead, they counted every calorie as if decency itself were policy. And that was the part Anna couldn't understand: how mercy could be measured, budgeted, and still be real. The Texas night was warm and endless, the kind that hummed with insects and loneliness. The camp lay still except for the quiet murmur of guards changing shifts. From her bunk, Anna could see the outline of the fence against a sky littered with stars. It reminded her of home, of nights spent watching searchlights sweep over ruined rooftops. Only here, the light didn't search for danger. It simply guarded silence. She rose quietly, careful not to wake the others, and stepped outside. The air smelled of dust and something faintly sweet. Somewhere beyond the kitchen, a kettle hissed. A late watchman laughed softly, the sound low and human. Then she caught it again, the buttery scent of corn carried on the breeze. It wrapped around her like memory. She thought of the first day in camp, the strange crackling sound, the warmth that had drifted toward her like an invitation. That smell had no right to exist in a place like this. It unsettled her more than the rifles ever had. Leaning against the fence, she stared through the silver wire into the open dark beyond. The land stretched endlessly flat, free, indifferent. For the first time, she realized how small the camp really was, how fragile its boundaries. On the other side of the fence was a world that could swallow her whole. Inside it, she was safe. The thought filled her with shame. Safety was not something she was supposed to feel. Not here, not as a prisoner of the enemy. She had tended to soldiers who starved, civilians who froze in basements. They had taught her to equate suffering with loyalty. But here, comfort came uninvited, and it felt like betrayal. She pressed her forehead against the cold wire, trying to summon the old fear, the righteous anger that once made everything simple. It didn't come. Only the scent of corn lingered, warm and persistent, seeping through every defense she had left. Behind her, the barracks whispered with the soft breathing of sleeping women. Ahead, the kitchen lights dimmed one by one. The wind shifted, and for a moment, she thought she could hear the faint pop of kernels. Tomorrow, they would taste it. It was late afternoon when the sound familiar, almost playful. Pop, pop, pop. The sun hung low over the camp, laying gold across the fences and barracks. The guards were gathered near the cookhouse, laughter drifting over the compound like smoke. Someone had brought out a dented iron pot, and soon the air filled with that impossible smell: salt, butter, corn. Anna and the other women paused in their work, scrubbing laundry at the troughs. Every burst from the pan made them flinch. though the rhythm was now unmistakable. The guards weren't firing rifles, they were cooking. The scent was stronger than before, thick and intoxicating. It floated through the wire, into the campyard, into every breath. Eli Turner was among them, sleeves rolled, hat tilted against the glare. He held the handle of the pot steady, while another soldier poured in a handful of kernels. The men joked as they worked, the popping echoing like harmless gunfire. Then Eli looked up and saw the women watching. The laughter faltered. The sound of the corn seemed suddenly too loud. He hesitated, glancing toward the tower where the officer stood. Then, almost on instinct, he reached into the tin bowl beside him, scooped a small handful of white puffs, and walked toward the fence. The women stiffened. Anna froze in place, her hands still submerged in the grey water. Eli stopped just short of the wire, close enough that the sunlight caught the faint dust on his uniform. His expression was careful, searching. He didn't speak. He just lifted his hands slightly, showing what he carried. Popcorn, a peace offering disguised as a snack. The camp went silent. Even the cicadas seemed to pause. The other guards exchanged uncertain glances. A few lowered their eyes, unsure whether to stop him or pretend they hadn't seen. The air between captor and captive tightened, like the wire itself. Anna stared at the kernels, pale and weightless, glowing against his sunburned skin. For reasons she couldn't name, the gesture frightened her more than the guns. No one moved. No one dared breathe. In that small, suspended moment, Mercy looked dangerously close to rebellion. For a moment, Anna thought he would take it back. The fence between them glinted like a blade, the silence too sharp to break. Then Eli extended his hand farther through the wire, the white kernels trembling slightly in his palm. One rolled to the dirt at her feet. The faint hiss of butter lingered in the air. No order came to stop him. The officer in the tower turned away, pretending not to see. Anna's breath felt trapped in her chest. Slowly, cautiously, she reached down and picked up the fallen piece. It was warm, so light, it barely seemed real. She hesitated, waiting for laughter, for cruelty, for something to prove her instincts right. None came. She placed it on her tongue. The taste hit first as salt, then sweetness, a strange combination that filled her mouth, like a memory she'd forgotten to have. The warmth spread upward, flooding her face, disarming every muscle she'd trained to stay tense. The crunch echoed softly in her ears, small but final, like the breaking of a lock. For an instant, the camp disappeared. She wasn't standing behind wire or under a foreign sun. She was a child again, in Hamburg's autumn fair, clutching her father's hand, the smell of roasted nuts and candied apples filling the air. She could hear the accordion music, see the bright lights spinning on the carousel. The memory came so suddenly that her knees almost gave out. When she opened her eyes, the world returned in color and silence. Eli was still there, watching her carefully, not smiling, not asking for anything. Behind him, the other guards had turned away, pretending to busy themselves with the stove. Anna wiped her eyes quickly, ashamed that tears could come so easily. She wanted to say something, to ask what this was, why it mattered, but words in either language felt useless. Eli gave a small nod, tipped his hat, and stepped back toward the others. The smell of popcorn hung in the air long after he was gone, stubborn as the heat. For the first time since capture, she forgot to hate him. That night, Anna sat by the narrow window of the barracks. The world outside reduced to shadows and the faint hum of crickets. The others had fallen asleep, but her hands still trembled slightly from the afternoon. On her lap lay a small notebook the Red Cross had issued, thin paper, a dull pencil, the sort of object meant for recording rations or addresses. Instead, she filled it with thoughts she couldn't speak aloud. The first line came hesitantly. The way a wound opens before bleeding, they disarmed us with decency. She stared at the words for a long time. It felt dangerous to write them, as if naming the truth made her less German, less loyal. Yet she couldn't deny what she had seen. The enemy offered food without command, laughter without cruelty, respect without reason. They didn't break her will, they quietly dismantled it. She remembered the propaganda officers back home, their promises that the Americans were savages hiding behind machines. But the men here were not monsters. They were ordinary, sunburned, polite to a fault. The more she tried to see them as villains, the more impossible it became. She looked down at her hands, once used to bandaging soldiers, now clean, steady, fed. Every act of kindness here struck her like a small betrayal. Safety had become its own kind of captivity, one she didn't know how to resist. A moth fluttered against the window pane, drawn to the lamplight. Beyond it, she could see the faint glow of the guard's campfire. Shadows moved slowly there, voices low, laughter soft. It was the same sound she'd heard when she was a child listening to her uncle's talk after supper. She wrote another line. They treat us as people, not prisoners, and that frightens me more than any weapon. The pencil hovered, then dropped from her fingers. For the first time, the enemy had given her something she couldn't return her. Question she could not answer. As she blew out the lamp, the smell of corn still lingered in the air, faint but persistent, like a lesson she hadn't finished learning. By spring, the camp received a new order from Washington. Prisoners could write home. 2 letters a month, inspected and censored. But there's 2, send. The announcement spread through the barracks like wind, through dry grass. Hope, disguised as bureaucracy. For the first time, the women were given pens, envelopes, and sheets of thin, yellowed paper. Anna stared at the blank page for a long time before writing a single word. Her sister's name, Clara, looked foreign in her handwriting. The distance between Texas and Hamburg felt immeasurable. She dipped her pen again and began carefully, as though the paper itself might break beneath her honesty. My dearest Clara, she wrote, I am alive, and I am safe. She paused. The next line felt impossible. How could she describe safety in a place built for enemies? How could she explain the smell of butter and corn in the air, or the laughter of men who guarded them with gentleness instead of rage? Her pen moved anyway. The camp is strange, she wrote. It is clean. The guards are polite. We rise with the sun and eat 3 times a day. They even let us rest on Sundays. It does not feel like captivity, it feels like waiting. She hesitated, then smiled faintly, ashamed of the truth and unable to stop herself. Yesterday, they gave us popcorn, she wrote, the word looking absurd in her own script. It cracks and jumps in the pan like tiny fireworks. It tastes of salt and butter. I laughed when I ate it, and then I wanted to cry. We eat popcorn while waiting for peace. Her throat tightened as she signed her name. Around her, the other women were writing too, some crying openly, others clutching their letters like relics. For years, they had been told that America would destroy them. Now, their own hands betrayed that lie in ink. She folded the page, sealing it with the smallest tremor. The guard who collected the letters smiled politely and said, Mail goes out tomorrow, ma'am. Anna watched him leave, the envelope vanishing into his satchel. She realized, with quiet horror and quiet hope, that part of her was already free. Weeks later, in the grey ruins of Hamburg, a postman delivered the impossible. His bag was nearly empty. There was little left to deliver in a city half buried under ash. But among the ration slips and government notices, he carried a single letter. It bore an American stamp and careful handwriting that looked like it had survived the ocean by will alone. Anna Krüger opened it with trembling hands. Her fingers were cracked from cleaning rubble. Her dress still smelled faintly of smoke. Inside, the paper was thin, the words small and precise. We eat popcorn while waiting for peace. She read the line twice, unsure if it was a mistaken translation or madness brought by war. Popcorn, butter, laughter. These were words that did not belong to prisoners. Neighbors gathered when they heard she'd received mail from America. They crowded into the cold apartment, their breath misting in the air as Clara read aloud. The letter spoke of order, of clean barracks and respectful guards, of Sunday rest and food that came without fear. It sounded like a fable told to children, not a report from captivity. An old man shook his head. It's propaganda. The Americans want to break our spirit. But a young widow beside him whispered, maybe they're just human. Her voice trembled as if saying it were a crime. Rumors began to ripple through the broken city. In bomb shelters and bread lines, people spoke in cautious tones that German prisoners were being treated well, that America fed even its enemies, that mercy might still exist somewhere beyond the ruins. The idea spread faster than rations, carried by mouths hungry for something other than despair. Clara reread her sister's words every night by candlelight. The sentence, we eat popcorn while waiting for peace, became a strange kind of prayer, a reminder that decency had survived the war even if no one knew what to do with it. Outside, the city groaned under the weight of its guilt and rubble, but somewhere in the silence between sirens, hope began to whisper in German. Maybe the Americans aren't monsters after all. Years passed. The war faded into textbooks, its edges dulled by retelling. Cities rebuilt, flags changed, uniforms disappeared. But in a quiet classroom on the outskirts of Bremen, a woman named Anna Krüger stood before her students, chalk dust clinging to her fingers, and spoke of the world as if it was still smoldering. She was a history teacher, now grey threaded through her hair, a softness in her voice that her students mistook for patience, but was really something older, understanding. On the shelf behind her sat a tin bowl, dented and small. Most thought it was a penholder. Only she knew it had once held popcorn in a Texas camp. Whenever she spoke of the war, she never mentioned battles or strategy. Instead, she spoke of people, of how hatred was easy to teach, but impossible to unlearn. Her lessons were quiet, almost tender. Decency, she would tell them, is not weakness. It's defiance with a gentle face. Sometimes, after class, she'd stay behind to wipe the board clean, pausing when the sunlight fell across her desk just right. In that light, the years folded away, and she could almost smell the butter and corn again, hear the soft laughter of men who should have been her enemies. It still felt absurd that a handful of food could undo years of fear. But absurdity, she realized, had been the point. War was built on logic, numbers, orders, strategy. Mercy had no logic, and that was what made it powerful. She closed her notebook one afternoon and wrote a final line in the margin, more for herself than for anyone who might read it. They thought popcorn was absurd, but maybe absurdity was mercy. The school bell rang, echoing through the hall. Children's voices rose like birds, full of noise and unscarred hope. Anna smiled, gathering her things, as she stepped outside. The wind carried the smell of roasted corn from a nearby vendor. For a heartbeat, time folded in on itself: the fence, the dust, the kindness she hadn't known how to name. History remembers who won the war, but compassion remembers who changed.